Hey there, everyone. It's day 29. Things are going good. My name's Henry. I'm a professor of religion and philosophy. Please seek professional help when dealing with substance abuse issues. So it's day 29. It's been about a month. And I've done 30 days before. And at this point, I have felt it's an achievement. I've done 30 days, absolutely no alcohol. And right now, I am sort of at a comfortable plateau. And you could go back after 30 days. But I feel that I definitely don't want to do that. But I feel if I did that, I would just go back into this same old pattern that a lot of people do with light to moderate drinking. And then I'd be getting into the problems of interfering with sleep, too many calories, etc. All the little things we've talked about. I think I've noticed my quality of life is different at 30 days. I think I really notice I'm eating a lot of food. It's very easy to control my weight. I feel I am looking into other things in my life. I've gotten into gaming with a nice gaming computer. I'm reading more. I'm being more active, hiking. So I feel that my mind is, my basic brain, my mind is looking for other things of more of an inherent value just in enjoying doing them. And I'm looking for that. That's become really my habit of thought. And I'm used to always being able to focus, able to get things done. I've noticed that if a problem comes up, I'm able to emotionally not let it affect me as much and to get it done and commit the hour to getting things done. So I do feel a little different. I feel more confident. I feel more competent as well. I feel like I can get things done more. Now, why is that? I guess, I don't know. It's not that I was drinking that much. It's just a different state of mind. And it's this idea of not just the days when I was drinking, but the whole a week of looking forward to it, having it be part of who I am was a little too much. And I've learned in part because that makes sense even for a light to moderate drinker, because alcohol is a very powerful, very addictive, and very potentially destructive drug. It's a major, serious drug. And what we have done throughout history and our society, our Western society, and contemporary societies, we have sort of normalized taking small amounts of that as a way of socializing, as a way of coping, as something to do, in so many ways. We see it in advertisements, movies, at sporting events. And so we have made that normative when it really is a serious drug. And even if you know, imbibe moderately, you're going to feel moderate effects because it is a very powerful drug. It does have this power to make us feel good. So I want to look today into some of the brain science. And I think that's helpful for me to know. Maybe for you it will be helpful as well. So I'm relying on the work of Dr. Jason Z.W. Powers, MD. He wrote a really great book called When the Servant Becomes the Master. In any case, he deals with some of the science behind alcohol and what it does. And I found that really helpful in making decisions about how I'm going to live my life. Alcohol affects a really basic part of the brain, the mesolimbic dopamine system, the MDS. I'll call it just the dopamine system. And it resides in a very primitive, basic part of the brain, very deep in the center. You can look at the brain as these concentric spheres. So it's a very basic part of the brain, dealing with food, survival, sex, and there's a dopamine reward that you are rewarded for getting food. You feel good. You've got food. It tastes good. The whole process is very rewarding, and there's a part of your brain that's giving you that reward. And it's shared by many earlier organic beings. Earlier mammals, our predecessors, probably even reptiles goes back, perhaps even further. It's just such a basic part of our brain chemistry. So when people are addicted and they are physically dependent and they have this disease, the disease of alcoholism, what the scientists have really told us now is that that is absolutely true, that this brain area has been really hijacked, it's been taken over, it's become dependent upon that alcohol in a very unhealthy way. And this dopamine system is not really fully even conscious. It's not part of our thinking necessarily. It's sort of subconscious, unconscious. We may not be aware of it, but those groups of cells, those neurons in that part of the brain, when they get used to something that produces those rewards, they want it and they want it and they demand it, and that percolates up into our conscious decision making of going to the bar and asking for a drink. So we really are sort of out of control. It's not really a matter of willpower of our higher brains, what we want. We have this incredible addictive desire for the substance that goes back to this dopamine system in the base of our brain. So it's amazing that they've been able to discover this, and we experience that as that addiction. And it really isn't rewarding for us to have part of our brain taken over. And again, even as a light to moderate drinker, do you really want to mess around with this dopamine system, which is so essential to all of life? And from a spiritual or psychological perspective, from a humanist perspective, look at all of your life, and you need that dopamine system to be there, I would argue, for all of your life, all of your minutes, all of the times of your daytime, your awareness, and your nighttime, to be fully functioning. You don't want this critical part of your brain to be hijacked. Dr. Powers writes that we have a baseline level of dopamine in our system, and when we have food, it goes up 150%, and sex normally produces 175%. So normally that would be amongst the most pleasurable things that a human being has, food and sex. And if you think of it, that's probably true. Those are some of the basic pleasures. But I don't want to really reduce it just to that. But drugs increase that dopamine much, much more. So sometimes I've heard heroin users say the use of heroin is so much better than sex. And this would be why, because these drugs increase that dopamine by 200, 300, 400%, much, much more. And that is why actually heroin addicts often give up on food and sex, because they're getting all their dopamine reward from a drug. So if sex is 175% more, Dr. Powers writes that ethanol would be about 200. So a big release of dopamine. Nicotine would be 225. Cocaine would be 300. Amphetamine would be 1,000% more. So really several times more even than alcohol. So they've actually been able to measure this in the brain. This, I think, gives a very powerful tool for us thinking about alcohol. Alcohol really is changing the brain chemistry of this very basic part of the brain, which is not really even our conscious awareness. It's not really our center for appreciating beauty, meaning, relationships. maybe love, relationships with other people, our sense of self, a sense of who we are, our sense of identity. It's this just basic gaming of this dopamine system in a very basic part of the brain. And when I think of that, I think that's really an inauthentic way of getting a high. It's getting a buzz, but it's not really a meaningful high. And when I'm aware of that, it makes me much less willing to use and abuse any substance, such as nicotine or alcohol, even in a moderate sense. It's still just creating a problem where there was no problem before. And I think another way of looking at it is to have a great contentment with one's regular everyday life and learn to see that the spiritual value of everyday life, of ordinary life. It's wonderful. It's just amazing that there is this world at all that came out of nothing, if you believe in God the Creator. What a tremendous explosion of reality. And if you have ever experienced love in many of its different forms, love of a special person, love of children, love of parents, love of friends, just this general universal human love, you've experienced something wonderful and magnificent. And that in itself is something better than this artificial dopamine rush from the mesolimbic dopamine system, very deep in the brain. And really, I think you have to make a judgment spiritually that where are you going to put your dopamine? Where are you going to get your highs? Where are you going to get your identity from? An artificial chemically induced high, or a deep contentment of spiritual or just life contentment based on the reality of your actual experience. So these dopamine surges and alcohol in the brain does not just affect this mesolimbic dopamine system, but also some of the higher aspects. And so even our emotional sense, our higher thinking sense, and our memories. And so it does affect the whole brain, not just that one part of the brain. And again, one thing it does tend to do is lessen our ability to write memories, and it also lessens our ability to send inhibitions down to some of the more basic parts of our brain. So there are negative aspects there. And I certainly want to remember the really important things in life. So I don't want to take a drug that's making it harder for my brain to write down memories. And often people who have brain damage or strokes, they lose their memory. And I've known people close to me who've really lost so much of their memory that they're really not the same person. And so again, do I want to take a substance that is, by its very nature, it's directed at certain parts of the brain, and one of them is memory. And I really think that even with a moderate use, I don't want to mess with that. I want to remember the good times. I want them to be written down, and I want to be able to recall those memories. So this dopamine system is actually in several areas of the brain, Dr. Powers explains. Primarily the basal forebrain, the amygdala, nucleus accumbens, and ventral tegmental area, VTA. So they are able to scan these areas from the outside, and they're able to tell where there's activity. So they can follow, basically have a few drinks, sit in the machine, and they can compare various of these scans and images, and they get a sense of which area of the brains are reacting more with these substances. So it's a complex cascade of events in the brain, and the science is getting very good at telling us what is going on. And again, full addiction really does become a disease. Just like if you eat really poorly, if you don't take care of yourself, if you smoke, if you're overweight, you will create heart conditions. And then you can't just say, oh, I don't have a disease. So yeah, this disease is created by human behavior, but it is actually a disease. And it has other aspects as well. But at some point, when there's really full-blown addiction, it has become a disease. Your brain is diseased. Your brain functioning is not functioning well. So I mean, the good news is that for most of it, the brain can heal itself. But we see it as a disease, meaning it really has changed the way our brain has functioned. And so why do we mess around with it? Why has it been so normalized in our culture? That is a real problem too. And as I've been talking to people about this, you know, there are a lot of people who just really do not drink at all or very, very little. There's a lot of people who do that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to moving more to that kind of lifestyle. It's very hard to give up that fun feeling, that buzz, that warmth with alcohol and other drugs. At a moderate level. It's hard to give that up because we immediately see it and experience it as something good. The psychologist and philosopher William James noticed that. Yes, there are alcoholics, but it starts out with this experience that is immediately seen as good by many people. But I think if we think rationally about what's going on and what the science is actually telling us, it's not a good thing for our brains. And I think the really good news about doing 90 days is that you actually will become that kind of person that doesn't drink, and you will see it, and you will experience it, and you will realize you are not missing out on anything. Even though, yeah, you do have that high dopamine time, that pleasurable time right away, but as I've been saying ever since day one, there are costs for that. There's no free lunch. You have to pay it back. So rationally, it makes sense to look back at 90 days and say, yeah, these 90 days were better than if I had consumed any alcohol. And that's a very powerful argument for not drinking, because in the end, it doesn't give us anything. And so Dr. Powers continues that there are other neurotransmitters, other chemicals in the brain that are affected by drug use. GABA, serotonin, which regulates learning, memory, and mood. Acetylcholine, which helps in memory. Endorphins, which are natural painkillers and mood enhancers. And glutamate, which regulates learning and memory. So they're getting a much better picture of this amazing electrical, biochemical machine that is our brains. And they're showing how alcohol and other drugs, other substances affect that wonderful machine. So I would say, take that wonderful computer we have with hundreds of billions of neurons times 10,000 connections each. Just this amazing tool that we have to appreciate all the wonders of life, and use that to get your high. Now, so he goes on, and I think this was a really nice passage. No matter what the cause, when our dopamine system experiences a surge in dopamine, it wakes up and says, pay attention, this is important, let's do this again. So when you get food, you get sex, your brain likes that and it pays attention to it. And also drugs. In other words, when ingested, addictive drugs powerfully but deceptively signal the brain a survival fitness benefit has arrived. So something that helps our basic survival. That's what our brain is, a tool to survive and procreate. And it rewards when it sees that. Subsequently, the brain is fooled into assigning a vital significance, a life significance. This is important to the experience of drug ingestion and is motivated to repeat that experience. So yeah, it's a chemical high. It's a chemical high. And ultimately having a life that's based upon these big dopamine surges is not going to be a life that's inherently in control. These big dopamine surges, they're not natural. Our brains are not used to having them. These surges from alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamines, 200, 400, 500 times, 500% of what we normally experience. We're just not used to that. That's not part of who we are. And so what does that mean for our experience as we look at our spiritual experience? We become dopes. We become looking after that. It's just sort of a mindless, homogenized drug experience, seeking that pleasure, just going after pleasure after pleasure after pleasure, drink after drink after drink. And a lot of philosophers have told us, all throughout history, a lot have noticed that feels so good when you're doing it, but ultimately people who live their lives based on that pursuit of pleasure only to the cost of other things, to letting other things go by, and that focus on those big dopamine surges, ultimately they don't live very good lives. Often they become self-destructive. Also, often they become very unhappy. So they've lost even basic contentment. So the life of the pleasure seeker becomes unmanageable and unpleasant. So what is the answer to that then? Well, first thing is do a cleanse, do a 90-day cleanse, and look for other things. Again, it's not just about giving up something good. It's about finding many other avenues of enjoying life. And once you give up that quest for the big dopamine surges, for the artificial highs, the artificial pleasures, you'll find out there's more. So I think our society and has done us a disservice by normalizing this. And I think from a religious, spiritual perspective, I suppose I'm guilty of this. I think of religion in terms of spirituality, in terms of enjoyment, of really having a good time, which it is. But I don't think alcohol and drugs are the path to that, even in just a very moderate sense. I don't think it's a contributing to really essential positive spiritual experience. Even prayer and meditation is not just about having this great high, this great feeling of great consuming love or the fire of God. It's not always about that. But contentment in the peace in the moment is very nice. And when you have that throughout the day, you've really achieved something. So taking these 90 days is to really practice that. And it's hard to really practice that kind of spiritual clarity and life clarity and focus while you're looking forward to partying, looking forward to socializing, looking forward to having a few beers on the weekend. It becomes, you're just surging the brain, and then it takes a few days to come back down, and then you're going at it again. So instead, focus on what is truly essential. And I find that what the scientists are telling us with brain scans is very powerful in showing us why this is a chemically induced dopamine rush that our brains are not used to, and that spiritually is really not leading us to really connect with our lives. That's what I think spirituality needs to teach us, how to connect with our real lives, with the people around us, with who we really are. And we can do that. And it's very rewarding. It's wonderful.